And oh my god, what follows is perhaps just as satisfying as that world noble punch from our first visit here. Hello my fellow wannabe Strawhats and welcome back to the One Piece saga, the series covering my never-ending journey of watching through One Piece for the very first time, giving my thoughts on it and ranking each arc in a tier list, to determine which is unquestionably, definitively, and definitely not just in my opinion, the best one. And today we have an arc that somehow managed to surpass absolutely every single moment in the series in terms of emotion. And yes, I was just as surprised myself. Though let's not get ahead of ourselves and take a quick look at how the tier list is looking right now. Going into our first official post-timeskip arc, the just covered Summit War saga still reigns as the top 2 arcs so far. But will this new era of One Piece be able to shake that up and perhaps even dethrone Marineford? Well, there's only one way to find out, so let us jump straight into Return to Sabaody. Alright, right from the get-go, I was not kidding when I said that this was legit the most emotional arc for me yet. I honestly don't even know why, but the idea of everyone meeting back up in the place where they were absolutely decimated and forcefully split up for years just clicked for me. I am one of those weirdly sentimental people, so the entire premise of old friends getting the squad back together was absolutely amazing. Though let's not rush ahead just yet. We opened the arc with a shot that basically mirrors where we left off. Only this time, instead of hanging it up, Luffy has come to get his hat back. And I'll be honest, it was already here where I got this weird feeling that everything has changed. It's extremely difficult to put into words, and I know it won't make sense to half of you, but I was absolutely buzzing. And just a few short moments later, that was reinforced as we see... Oh wait, my notes here said... Snow, and then Pog with about 50 O's. Anyway, we see that Hancock along with the rest of the Kuja tribe have arrived to pick up Luffy. And like an absolute Chad, Luffy calmly walks out, scares off the giant beast with his new Haki powers, and explains that he's actually been alone for the past 6 months. And importantly, we see a very visual representation of the new Luffy that is the scar covering his entire chest. First off, this is the type of permanence I love in my stories. We know that what happened with Ace will obviously haunt him forever, so it's always there as a lingering reminder to the day that Luffy was changed forever. Especially in these series where the protagonists are continuously pounded into the ground, scars and wounds basically carry zero meaning. So when one of them actually means something, sort of like we've seen with Zoro already, it is a very, very welcome change. Though secondly, and I'm honestly not sure whether this is intentional or purely a design decision, I feel like with Luffy's new getup that we see here, he almost wears it as a badge of honor. Almost as if to say, you did this to me, but I never gave up, and I am now back stronger than ever. Though it could also just be replicating his initial outfit from way back, and I could just be reading into it way too much. But it's then that we see him put on the hat and smile, signaling that Luffy 2.0 is very much here. We then jump over to Sabaody, where we see Rayleigh and Shakky reminisce about the day the Strawhats first arrived. And before we get any further into it, I think I have to write a formal apology to Rayleigh for ever doubting his intentions, because he is literally the most wholesome Uncle Iroh type of dude ever, and that would be turned up to 11 later in the arc. Though importantly, we do get to see an, albeit very brief, but a serious conversation between the two, talking about how Luffy is truly infamous already, and that their reunion is still not a guarantee. As would be trend with this arc, it just expands that mystique of how the world has changed since we last saw it. Because again, it's been 2 years. Though what comes next is perhaps the greatest execution of the gag yet, but it also is just an absolutely awesome moment even aside from the joke. as we see Zoro of all people be the first to arrive. Though what I absolutely loved here is how his arrival, signifying the crew slowly beginning to reunite, is portrayed as this almost dreamy sequence. There's this subtle amount of bloom, the colors are all warm, and the entire screen is just a little bit fuzzy, and I just loved it. And of course, Zoro being the first to arrive goes against completely everything we'd expect. And while it would end up being just another spin on the Zoro lost joke, it does maintain that foreign feeling of not quite knowing who the Strawhats are anymore. Because yes, for a second, I did think the gag would be retired here. I legit thought Zoro finally got some sense of direction. But alas, he would get lost just moments later. And before we move on to the story itself, I suppose this is as good of a time as any to talk about the character redesigns, even though in story, some of them are still hidden to us for the time being. I already talked about Luffy at the top of the video, so the TLDR there is that his already existing design was just elevated and he looks awesome. And yes, Luffy, show everyone that scar. You are an absolute Chad and everyone should know it. Next up, we have the just mentioned Zoro, who now too has a pretty big scar that has seemingly taken out one of his eyes. And for some reason, no one has bothered to ask what happened. I'm guessing that's a parting gift left by Haki, but regardless of what it is, I love it. Very similar to Luffy, he hasn't really had any major changes to his design. It's just his original one that has been made to look even more rugged, very explicitly showing you the experience he has undergone literally on his face. So yes, Zoro's new design is straight up a 10 out of 10. Next up, we have Nami, who's changed her look up quite a bit. But let's be serious now. There is one thing we need to address. Her hair. I know what you were thinking, get your head out of the gutter. But yes, her hair. This is actually a, albeit super minor detail, but one that I've really enjoyed throughout the show, as she has actually been growing it out since the very beginning. It's just one of those minor details to show the passage of time that really makes the characters feel a lot more alive, if that makes sense. So yeah, her new design is also awesome. But one small detail. Who cut Luffy's hair during those 2 years, or even those 6 months while he was alone? And yes, let's not beat around the bush. Fan service here is turned up to real anime levels. And speaking of which, and we'll be talking about this in a bit, I seriously hope that Nami doesn't just become the butt of the joke for Sanji for the next 3 arcs. Though yeah, anyway, all in all, Nami's new design is also a big W. Next up, we have Usopp, who has had what I might call the biggest glow up ever. I don't think it's a stretch to say that his is probably the biggest change in terms of design out of the crew. But in short, I'm not quite used to it yet, but I really like it. Remembering the insane island he trained on, and considering how much he wanted to become a warrior, his super rugged look fits extremely well for his character. So yes, yet another major W. Oh, and also spoiler alert, I already love the new Usopp, so yeah, times have very much changed. Moving on to Sanji, his redesign is also quite subtle, notably him featuring longer hair to cover up one of his eyes, and his stubble now being an actual beard. And yeah, I know the emo hair jokes will probably be flung around, but I really like his more mature look. And I suppose it's not even worth saying at this point, but his redesign is also a big W. As for Sanji himself though, well, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. As for my boy Chopper, he largely looks the same, only he has forgone his iconic top hat for a cap of sorts. I'll be honest, I do sort of miss his little dapper top hat, but his lil cap seriously grew on me too, so it's still very cool. The only fear I have with Chopper is that they're starting to sort of over-cutify him, if that makes sense. I'm not really worried about it yet, but they're just slowly moving into that direction. So I hope it is just a design decision and that it ultimately wouldn't really change him at all. Because yes, my boy Chopper isn't some cutesy animal, he's a cool little dude. Next up, we have Robin. And before I say anything else about her, I am now convinced that Robin is either multiple people or the real Robin died and this is an imposter. Okay, obviously I am joking, but what I'm getting at is that she has to be the single character with the most inconsistent design, right? I didn't really bring it up in the separation episodes, but the art style there was also a major departure from her usual look, though that was pretty clear that her story was animated by a completely different studio, so I didn't really talk about it. But anyway, her post-timeskip look is 100% the best version in my opinion. It's just that comparing images of her side by side is a little bit weird. As for Franky, and yes, I know I said this with Usopp, but this is 100% the biggest revamp, right? And if I'm being totally honest, this is one that I am a bit torn on. A large part of that may just be me not being used to it, but the cyborg angle is a little bit too much for me in this version of Franky. In terms of personality and everything else, I still absolutely love him. It's just the visual design that I'm probably just not used to yet. So yeah, I guess only time will tell. And lastly, we have Brook, who, because of the nature of his power, can't really have any major changes aside from his outfits. So yeah, not much to say there, Brook is still Brook. Yes, he does look like a rock star, but he is still just a skeleton. Though jumping back into the story, we see Nami again and hear that the Navy HQ is now on the other side of the red line, i.e. in the New World, aka where we are headed to right now. Well, isn't that convenient, huh? But anyway, the trend continues here of us not seeing the faces of the crew just yet, which very much maintains that air of mystique I mentioned before. Though it's also here where we meet what somehow became one of my favorite groups of baddies in the series yet. The budget Strawhats. The concept of someone impersonating Luffy for clout is actually something we saw way back in Logtown, and if you remember what I said there, this is basically exactly what I meant by that. Most people will have heard of the Strawhats, but it's not like digital cameras and the internet exist in the story. So it all just comes down to wanted posters, which, as we've seen with Sanji, are no better than an approximation of what they might look like. And all it takes is for someone like the budget Strawhats to leverage that lack of information for their own benefits. And so, we pretty much see them openly exploit the infamy of the crew to get whatever they want. I do admit, the execution of it did fall short in my opinion, though in terms of mini-villains for this very short arc, I think they worked very well. Especially because their main task is not to oppose the Strawhats. Rather, it's just to contrast how ridiculously powerful they've become. Though what follows is perhaps one of my favorite scenes of this arc. Usopp's and Nami's reunion. First off, we see Usopp being super cool and using one of his special attacks on the fake Nami. He then calmly walks up to the bar, jokingly saying, "So young lady, do you want a drink with me?" And the absolute joy that sparks on Nami's face is genuinely priceless. As I said at the top of the video, anything to do with reuniting with old friends, nostalgia, and everything else of that nature will always hit me harder than any death ever would. So this tiny scene genuinely hit me in the feels. Again, it is very hard to put into words, but I think it goes to show how masterfully Oda has crafted these characters. Because the sheer amount of joy I felt when I saw them finally meet each other again was absolutely indescribable. Not to mention that Nami, in almost all situations, is the more cool-headed one. Yet here, we see her grab and praise him about getting stronger as if he was literally her one and only best friend. So yes, this was a very wholesome, a very surprising, and a brilliant scene. Oh, and Nami is also literally Thor, so that's pretty cool. And before we follow up with them, we jump over to Sabaody Park, where we see none other than our own Soul King Brook. Yeah, remember how in post-war I said I had no clue where his story might go? Well yeah, that very much tracks, because this was about the last thing I could have imagined. And to be fair, it is a super interesting concept, as we know that skeletons, even in the world of One Piece, are not a regular thing. But the only problem I had with this is how come the Navy never tried to catch him? He was identified as one of the Strawhats by a whole bunch of people in Sabaody originally, so I do find it a bit weird that they wouldn't have tried to trace him back to the rest of the crew. Obviously, we know that that would have been a dead end since they never really planned to split up as they did, but still, I mean, he's the only walking skeleton, right? But anyway, all in all, I am a little bit mixed on his story. I do think that him finally catching a break was great, as, again, he was alone for 50 years. And then when he joined the crew, they were once again decimated. But in a more meta sense, I guess ironically, his story feels super one note. Maybe we'll find out more soon, but as of right now, it does just seem like he's been mostly chilling and not much else. So yeah, I guess time will tell. Though, cutting to Sanji and, well, yeah. If you've been following the series for a while, you will probably remember how for the first half of the series, I used to always dunk on Usopp. Yeah, well, something tells me that it's going to be Sanji this time around. Because his sometimes weird but mostly fine chivalry has turned into a literal creepy obsession. And yes, as usual, the Sanji stans are about to bust in with all their rationalizations of why he acts this way, but I don't care. Sanji is absolutely awesome until Oda decides to lean into his weird, pervy, woman-obsessive sides. That's when he becomes just insufferable. The entire chivalry angle that we saw in Eni's lobby, for example, was mostly interesting at least. But right now, it seems like the most dumbed down version of that gag. This might just be me, but I still think that out of the entire crew, he is the least interesting and least developed character. So I just wish that the story worked to flesh him out and make him a little more dynamic in this new chapter, rather than just reverting to that same old, very overdone joke. With how much the story emphasized how our characters have changed, this was honestly just super disappointing and is by far the weakest part of this arc. But alright, I've spent enough mental energy on Sanji. We then cut over to the much better character, sneaky old Robin, who is being tailed by, presumably, the world government. And obviously we'll talk about this plenty more later, but like, why does Robin show up and literally not mention a word of what she's been up to? Not even a, hey Luffy, your pop's pretty cool. Though to be fair, they haven't really exchanged any of their tales yet, so I am fully expecting a chilling around the campfire vibe where Robin suddenly starts dropping lore bombshells. Right? Surely Oda won't make me wait 700 episodes. Right? Though her peacefully finding her way back to the Sunny did once again hit me in the feels. Not to mention her reunion with Franky, who's already chilling on the ship. Though what caught me by surprise is the quite serious conversation that Franky has with her about Brook. Notably, that he isn't even sure if Brook would return to the crew. I'll be honest, I gave it around a 10% chance possibility that he would in fact be someone like Vivi, someone who joined the crew but stayed behind because they had actually found their place already. Considering that in the grand scheme of things, Brook hasn't really been around for that long, I didn't really think it was out of the range of possibility. Especially because Luffy has already sort of saved him from his eternal curse of drifting in the Florian Triangle. Though luckily, and yes I was very happy about this, those 10% were completely unfounded and merely a thought Franky shared, as Brook would in fact regroup with the crew just a few short moments later. But in a broader sense, this is the type of character-centric stories I'd honestly love to see more of. We are always so focused on external threats that I'd love to see some inner drama among the crew. I talked about this already in some of the previous arcs, but I'd love for the Water 7 character-driven drama type of story to appear sometime again, now that all of our crew members are much more mature. I am certain Oda could pull off something absolutely wonderful there. I mean, it's not like we don't have proof. I didn't really like Usopp, but after Water 7, and even more so now, he is an absolute legend in my eyes. So go ahead, give this sort of story to Sanji. Maybe he will finally become tolerable. And yes, before you ask, I will keep dunking on him. Finally, cutting back to Luffy, we see him run into the fake Strawhats with his comically overpacked backpack. And what I loved here was the whole "I've been told not to cause trouble" vibe that he has. Usually we knew Luffy as this carefree guy who didn't really care too much about how messy things got, he just rolled with it. But here, he was actually trying to calm the situation down. And again, I really enjoyed his much more mature vibe here. Of course, things would go terribly wrong in just a bit, but I think the sheer fact that Luffy actually tried to keep a low profile was a nice addition to show just how his way of thinking has changed. Oh, and yes, the scene of him casually dodging the bullets and blasting them with Haki was great. For the sake of time, we won't go through all the other shenanigans the crew gets into, but there are a couple that I definitely want to mention. First of which being Zoro, who, as expected, does in fact get lost, but then proceeds to slice a galleon clean in half. And that's insane. Considering he didn't even break a sweat here, I cannot wait to see him properly in action. Though the other sort of side story is surrounding Chopper. I assume it's because he is a reindeer, he's not too good at telling people apart, so he basically gets caught up with the fake Strawhats, who are obviously a bunch of douchebags. And yes, the whole "I've worked so hard to become a better doctor and you do not even care" thing was extremely sad, but once again, what I loved here the most is his first run-in with Usopp and Nami. Yes, it was incredibly wholesome seeing them reunite, but the sharp cut to Nami just explaining that those people he saw are not the real Strawhats gave me a very, very good laugh. I love just how confused Chopper is about the whole "wait, so there aren't two Namis?" And he then just goes on this long rant. It was just brilliant. And on a very similar note, Chopper and Usopp later raving about all the new Franky abilities was simply 10 out of 10. Seeing the boys back together was awesome. Okay, yes, there is one more thing. Brook's song about the new world was super fourth wall breaky, and I love that too. And the last thing that doesn't really have anything to do with the story, we do get a new stinger, which does appear to be just a generic one. So I do hope that this is another early Water 7 thing of it just being placeholder until all the other individual ones start to appear. Though returning to Luffy, it's here where we finally get into the good stuff, as he's led to the fake Strawhats' recruitment site, only for us to hear that just like on their first venture through Sabaody, a whole bunch of Pacifistas have been deployed to capture the crew. A couple of things to mention here. The snake-looking dude definitely looks like a character we'll be seeing more of, so I don't think it's really worth delving into his character too much here, but he is terrifying, that's for sure. And one thing that I really liked here is how we see almost the entire crew already chilling on the Sunny, and all of them just being incredibly excited to see Luffy again. It was a very small addition, yes, but I do think it just hammers home that feeling of this arc being all about the crew's reunion. And despite their past tragic experience, the Pacifistas and everything else is secondary. And speaking of which, as we return to Luffy, things very much go down as Sentomaru arrives. And oh my god, what follows is perhaps just as satisfying as that World Noble punch from our first visit here. I was literally glued to my screen at this point. But Luffy, calm as ice, dodges the shot, enters second gear with a new technique by the way, and absolutely decimates the Pacifista with a single hit that creates another shockwave. I love this so much. Replicating the same way he finally beat the Pacifista after that grueling battle originally, with this not even breaking a sweat one-shot, was just 10 out of 10. This was such an incredible payoff moment for all the times Luffy has taken L's recently, and the animation and the sound design, literally a 10 out of 10. For all of my fellow gamers out there, this will probably be very relatable, but this seriously felt like one of those times where you get your head hammered in by a boss, then get mad and go grind your stats and items like crazy, only to return and realize you must have overdone it a bit, because you can literally one-shot it now. And as if that wasn't enough, it's then that Zoro and Sanji come into the picture and tear apart a whole bunch more Pacifistas, also confirming the fact that they've been grinding a little too much. But as all hell breaks loose, we get another scene that was just a hair away from finally breaking me. Luffy calls out to Rayleigh, promising to be the king of the pirates. Man. Does Oda know how to write absolutely beautiful character dynamics? Like seriously, this may get me blasted, but honestly, and yes, I know this may be because I actually kind of predicted it, Ace's death had absolutely nothing on some of the moments we saw in this one. Even something as little as Rayleigh tearing up carries so much emotion. Everything we've seen from him has been shrouded in mystery. He's a literal living legend, the right hand of Roger himself, who basically reveals something world-altering for the crew every single time he speaks. Yet, here he is, tearing up about his student simply thanking him. Of course, we know that to him, Luffy is as close as he's ever been to talking to Roger again. But regardless of the reason, this one seriously stood out to me. It was just such a, for lack of a better word, human moment. I'm not sure whether I've talked about this in this series before, but I am one of those people that simply does not get emotional over fiction. With the exception of the tale of Iroh, that did break me. But regardless, what I'm trying to say here is that I may be emotionally invested in a story, but in basically all cases, I won't really be moved by it. And that's what stuck out to me the most here, because this is as close as the series has ever gotten. When I said Flamey Boy getting extinguished did not come close to this, that was not clickbaity hyperbole. I am being 100% genuine. And I don't say this to come off as some tough guy who never cries or whatever. I just want to do my best to put into words how it made me feel, which was this sort of overwhelming joy where you almost feel sad at the same time. Yeah, human emotions are really weird, aren't they? So yeah, I admit this might totally just be me and my weird sentimental brain, but I loved it. And most importantly, I am so sorry for ever doubting Rayleigh. Oh, and quick note before we move on. Some of you have asked what I think of Haki so far as an extension to the magic system. But considering how utterly wrong I turned out to be about the 6 powers, I don't want to rush ahead just yet. It seems like Oda does have a plan, but I also realize that power scaly shenanigans are possible with Haki even more so than with the 6 powers. So I will hold off going on any rants until we see more of it. Though yeah, it can be a very slippery slope. Especially if it just becomes a new arbitrary baseline for the sake of upping power. Though again, no judgments just yet. But now with the crew all on their way back to the Sunny, we see their new pals all chiming in to ensure that they get away without too much trouble. And while yes, all of them were awesome to see, you already know that the one I am most hyped about is Ghost Girl. She has basically pulled the JoJo card of a villain becoming an absolutely awesome ally, and I am all here for it. Like seriously, Oda. I know her ability combined with the brute strength of the Strawhats would just break the series, but can we please get her on the crew? Her dynamic with Zoro is spin-off worthy already. Imagine what it would be like with the rest of the crew. And also, if we don't see how much they got on each other's nerves during those 2 years, I'll be forever disappointed. TLDR, Ghost Girl has to appear again sometime soon. Also Shanks, and also Rayleigh, and also Dragon, but mostly Ghost Girl. Though what I also found interesting is that Usopp's trainer, whose name I've forgotten, is never actually revealed to us. Even when he's helping the crew get away and sheds a tear as they part ways, his identity is kept secret. Which brings me on to the curious question of who he really is. I think we've already established the fact that Oda likes to plan these sorts of things to suddenly spring on you in about 800 episodes, so now I'm curious as to when we might see him next. It's pretty clear that he was incredibly important for Usopp, even more so than Broggy and Dory, which, by the way, how have we not even brought up Elbaf again? But regardless, I do think keeping his identity secret is very fishy, so we'll see how that develops. And in a broader sense, I do find the idea that the crew has now made a lot of allies all over the world very interesting, considering all of my theories about the final war. And that was very nicely demonstrated here. And similar to what I just said about the armor dude, I am curious to see how and when they come back into the picture. And I also can't help but notice the direct parallels to the start of the series. So if this grand saga were to end in a Marineford 2.0 if you will, with Luffy leading the charge, well, wouldn't these allies be very nice to have? But with all that praise, yes, it's also here where we see Sanji get a nosebleed just from seeing Nami and Robin. I seriously hope this doesn't become a defining character trait because at this point, unlike the rest of the crew, it seems like he's actively regressed as a character. TLDR, he went from a chivalrous, somewhat unique character to a cheap trope anime perv, which is just sad. I think I've made it pretty clear that I very much trust Oda, but right now, he is so far behind the rest of the Strawhats for me that he's not even in the race. Though we are definitely not going to leave on that negative note, because there's still their formal reunion to talk about. We see the ship's coating inflate, and after 2 long years, their journey can finally continue, but not before Luffy gives his speech. He thanks them for putting up with his selfish decision for those 2 long years, and finally gives the command to spread the sail as the Straw Hat flag flies once again. And with that, the Straw Hats are back for good, and man, was this not a perfect send-off. And that is Return to Sabaody. I think it's safe to say that I absolutely did not expect to enjoy this one as much as I did. I was definitely incredibly excited to see how the reunion of everyone's favorite pirates would go, but the way it went down, for one reason or another, hit particularly hard. And while I don't think the budget Straw Hats were anything to write home about, and Sanji's already putting out some bad vibes, I cannot deny that from an emotional point of view, I do not think any arc comes even remotely close to this one for me. From a critical point of view, I know many will disagree, but hey, it's my tier list. If I want to, I can switch it around later once the hype dies down. But yes, as of now, it is easily taking the top S tier. Yes, perhaps this wasn't surprising at all with how much all the reunion scenes and then Rayleigh parting ways with Luffy hit me. It's just one of those things that can really only happen in a series as long as One Piece because there's so much history there. But yeah, I simply love this one. And you might also notice that I've switched around a whole bunch more stuff, most of all in the S tier. Well, the thing is, after spending countless hours thinking about it while going to bed, I've concluded that there might have been some recency bias there with the original rankings, and in retrospect, I do think that I actually enjoyed Sabaody more than Marineford and Water 7 more than Enies Lobby. I've made a few other changes, so feel free to pause the video and look through those, but as of right now, this is my definitive ranking of the series so far. If anything changes, it's as simple as me moving them around. But with that said, it's about time for us to set off to the bottom of the sea in our search of Bikini Bottom. And that's the video. Perhaps you're sick of hearing this by now, but yes, this one turned out way longer than I expected, especially considering this was merely 6 episodes. And because this is future Korotos speaking to you, I can already tell you that Fishman Island is 2 videos. Though yeah, aside from that, I still want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And let's also give a warm welcomes to the newest members of the team, Patty, Joko, and Scarecrow. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my ramblings, so seriously, thank you, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.